"Do not take another step," the old royal guard whispered, his weathered face drained of color. "If the king's wolf wakes tonight, no one will be able to calm him." Emily Carter tightened her grip around the worn leather satchel hanging from her shoulder and glanced toward the towering black stone palace rising above the silver pines. It looked less like a home and more like a mountain carved by forgotten storms. Every window glowing softly beneath the full moon as cold wind carried the scent of cedar and rain across the courtyard. She had traveled nearly 200 miles by carriage from the quiet village where her greatest concern had once been tending injured animals and comforting frightened children after harsh winters. Never in her 23 years had she imagined receiving a royal summons sealed with the crest of the Alpha King himself. The letter had been painfully brief. A healer was required. Absolute discretion was expected. Refusal was not an option. No explanation had followed. Emily had assumed someone important was ill, perhaps a noble recovering from an accident or an elderly advisor weakened by age. Instead, every servant she passed kept their eyes lowered. Every soldier stood unnaturally still, and every corridor echoed with an uneasy silence that seemed to warn her she had stepped into the center of a secret no outsider was meant to witness. A young attendant hurried toward her, barely older than 18, his hands trembling as he accepted her coat. "Please," he said quietly, "whatever happens inside, don't run." Emily blinked in confusion. "Why would I run?" The young man forced a nervous smile that disappeared almost instantly. "I hope you won't have a reason." Before she could ask another question, two royal guards opened a pair of towering oak doors engraved with wolves beneath a crescent moon. Warm firelight spilled into the hallway, revealing a chamber far larger than she expected. Massive bookshelves climbed toward a vaulted ceiling painted with constellations, while a fireplace large enough to stand inside filled the room with a gentle golden glow. Everything about the chamber spoke of impossible strength held beneath careful control. Yet the first thing Emily noticed was not the luxurious surroundings. It was the silence, an unsettling silence that seemed to press against her ears. Standing near the windows was a tall man dressed in a simple black shirt with sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. His broad shoulders remained perfectly still as moonlight outlined the sharp lines of his profile. He did not turn when she entered. He simply continued staring into the darkness beyond the glass, as though listening to something only he could hear. "Your Majesty," one of the guards announced respectfully, "the healer has arrived." Only then did the man slowly face her. Emily found herself unexpectedly holding her breath. Stories had painted the Alpha King Damian Blackwood as terrifying, ruthless, almost untouchable. Instead, she saw exhaustion hidden behind remarkable composure. His silver-gray eyes looked older than the rest of him, carrying the weight of countless sleepless nights. A faint scar crossed one eyebrow, but it only made him appear more human than the legend suggested. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice calm and surprisingly gentle. "Thank you for coming." Emily offered a respectful nod. "I came because someone asked for help." Something almost like amusement flickered across his face before vanishing. "You may regret that decision." She opened her satchel and smiled politely. "People usually say thank you after I finish treating them." One corner of Damien's mouth lifted ever so slightly. It was the first genuine expression anyone in the room had seen all evening. The guards exchanged uncertain glances, visibly uncomfortable. Emily noticed their reactions, but chose not to comment. Instead, she stepped closer, studying the king's complexion with a professional eye. He looked healthy enough, yet there was tension in every controlled breath, every tightened finger resting against the windowsill. "May I examine your wrist?" she asked softly. Damien hesitated. The room became impossibly quiet. Finally, he extended one hand. Emily reached forward without fear, her fingertips gently brushing against his skin as she searched for his pulse. The instant their hands met, the air changed. The fire crackled violently, although no log had shifted. Every candle along the walls flickered at once. Somewhere deep inside the palace, a low rumble echoed through the stone like distant thunder. Damien's eyes widened for the briefest heartbeat before he looked away, jaw tightening as though fighting an invisible force. Emily instinctively released his wrist. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Did I hurt you?" He answered too quickly. "No." But behind that single word, something ancient stirred. Hidden beneath perfect discipline, The Alpha King's wolf had opened its eyes for the first time in years. Damien Blackwood withdrew his hand with such careful control that only someone trained to notice the smallest changes could have seen the faint tremor passing through his fingers. Emily Carter watched him quietly, refusing to let uncertainty cloud her judgment. She had spent years treating frightened patients who hid their pain behind forced smiles, and the Alpha King suddenly reminded her of every stubborn soul who insisted they were perfectly fine while carrying burdens too heavy to name. The uneasy silence stretched across the chamber until Damien stepped away from the window and gestured toward a chair beside the fireplace. "Please," he said with calm courtesy. "Sit. You have traveled a long way." Emily accepted the invitation without hesitation, placing her leather satchel beside the chair before studying him once more. The warmth from the fire softened the sharp shadows across his face, yet it did not erase the exhaustion lingering in his silver eyes. There was no fever, no visible wound, no sign of ordinary illness. Whatever troubled him lived somewhere deeper than flesh. "The letter said a healer was needed," she said gently. "But no one has told me what is wrong." Damien remained standing, his posture impossibly straight as though relaxing had become something he no longer remembered how to do. "That is because no physician has ever found an answer." Emily folded her hands calmly. "Then perhaps I should begin by asking questions instead of making assumptions." Before Damien could answer, another low vibration rolled through the stone floor beneath their feet. It lasted only a heartbeat, but every guard stationed near the entrance instinctively stiffened. Emily noticed the reaction immediately. None of them reached for a weapon. None of them looked toward the windows. Every pair of anxious eyes shifted toward their king instead. Damien closed his eyes for a brief moment, drawing one slow breath before opening them again. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "Some evenings are more difficult than others." Emily nodded with sincere understanding. Everyone has difficult evenings. One of the older guards nearly looked shocked by her response, as though no one had ever answered the king so simply. Damien seemed equally surprised. "You are either very brave," he observed, "or you have not yet realized where you are." Emily offered a small smile. "Perhaps both." For the first time, genuine warmth flickered across Damien's expression before disappearing beneath practiced restraint. He walked toward an oak table where untouched tea had long since grown cold. As he reached for the cup, his hand suddenly froze. His breathing changed almost imperceptibly, slower yet somehow heavier, as though another rhythm echoed beneath his own heartbeat. Emily felt it before she understood it. The room itself seemed to tighten around them. The fire leaned sharply to one side, although no draft entered the chamber. Somewhere beyond the walls, wolves began howling beneath the rising moon. One voice answered them from somewhere much closer. It was not spoken aloud. It existed somewhere between instinct and silence, impossible to hear with ordinary ears, yet impossible to ignore. "Find her." Damien gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned pale. "Not now," he answered silently. "She stays. She leaves." The invisible presence did not argue with words. Instead, a powerful wave of emotion swept through him so intensely that Emily unconsciously rose from her chair. She could not explain why, but she suddenly felt overwhelming loneliness filling the room, ancient and endless, followed by fierce protectiveness that seemed completely out of place. "Your Majesty?" she asked softly. Damien straightened immediately, forcing every trace of emotion. Behind the familiar mask worn by kings. "I apologize." His voice remained controlled, yet quieter than before. "You should not have witnessed that." Emily stepped closer despite the concerned expressions of the guards. "I witnessed someone trying very hard not to burden anyone else." Damien looked directly into her eyes. No courtier, advisor, or warrior had ever spoken to him that way. They feared his authority, admired his victories, or obeyed his commands. This village healer simply saw another human being carrying invisible weight. The realization unsettled him more than any battlefield ever had. Behind the calm surface of his expression, the wolf stirred again, no longer restless but strangely attentive. It did not demand. It did not roar. It simply watched the woman standing only a few feet away with quiet certainty, as though recognizing something Damien himself refused to accept. Outside, clouds drifted away from the full moon, flooding the chamber with silver light. Emily noticed the change first. Damien's eyes, already striking, briefly shimmered with a faint golden glow before returning to silver. It happened so quickly, she almost questioned whether she had imagined it. Almost. Across the room, the oldest royal guard slowly lowered his head, his heart sinking with a truth he had prayed never to witness. The king's wolf was no longer sleeping. Emily Carter could not shake the image of that fleeting golden light in Damien Blackwood's eyes. She had spent years observing details others overlooked because healing often began with the smallest clue, a change in breathing, a tired glance, a trembling hand. Whatever she had witnessed had not been an illusion. Yet instead of fear, curiosity settled quietly inside her. "May I continue your examination?" she asked with calm sincerity. Damien hesitated for a single heartbeat before giving one slow nod. "If you believe it will help." Emily opened her satchel and removed a small notebook along with a polished wooden stethoscope she had inherited from the physician who trained her. She approached without haste, careful not to invade his space. The guards remained frozen near the entrance, exchanging uneasy glances that suggested they expected something to go terribly wrong. Emily noticed their concern, but chose to focus entirely on her patient. "Please sit," she said gently, gesturing toward a chair beside the fireplace. Damien obeyed without argument. Even that simple act surprised everyone watching. Kings rarely accepted instructions from strangers, yet he lowered himself into the chair with quiet dignity, his attention never leaving Emily's face. She knelt slightly beside him to listen to his heartbeat, placing the instrument carefully against his chest. The moment the cool wood touched him, Damien inhaled sharply. His pulse, steady only seconds before, accelerated with startling speed. Emily frowned in concentration. "Your heart is perfectly healthy," she murmured, almost to herself. "But it reacts as though it expects danger that never arrives." Damien gave a faint, humorless smile. "Perhaps it has learned to expect danger everywhere." Emily looked up. "That sounds exhausting." For a brief instant, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly while moonlight spilled across the stone floor. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, the distant wolves had fallen strangely silent. Then another sound emerged, quieter than a whisper, yet carrying impossible weight. It did not come from outside. It came from within Damien himself. "Mine." The word echoed through his thoughts with startling clarity. Damien immediately stood and stepped away from Emily so abruptly that the chair slid several inches across the polished floor. Every guard instinctively tensed, but no one moved closer. They had seen this struggle before, though never under these circumstances. Emily slowly lowered her hands, refusing to appear alarmed. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. Damien turned toward the towering windows, his shoulders rigid. "No." His voice remained controlled, but each word sounded carefully restrained. "You have done nothing wrong." Inside his mind, however, another presence refused to remain silent. "She belongs beside us. She is safe here." Damien closed his eyes. "Stop. You do not know her. She is a stranger." The answer came immediately, calm and absolute. "She is not a stranger. You only met her today. I have waited much longer." Damien's breathing grew uneven for the first time in years. Every lesson in discipline, every hour spent mastering the ancient instincts of an alpha king, suddenly felt fragile beneath the quiet certainty of the wolf. Emily watched him with growing concern. She had expected illness, perhaps an old injury or relentless stress, but this felt different. It felt as though he was carrying on a conversation no one else could hear. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes people carry burdens they think they have to face alone." Damien remained motionless. "Sometimes they are right." Emily shook her head gently. "I have never believed that." Those simple words reached somewhere no royal advisor, commander, or council member had touched in years. Damien slowly turned to face her again. There was no anger in his expression, only quiet disbelief. Why was this woman speaking to him without fear, without ambition, without expecting anything in return? Before he could answer, a young servant rushed into the chamber, stopping several feet away as he bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," he said nervously, "the council has gathered for the midnight meeting. They are waiting." Damien did not immediately respond. His eyes remained fixed on Emily. The servant cautiously followed his gaze and noticed the healer standing only a few feet away from the throne. His face immediately lost all color. Everyone in the palace knew one rule that had never changed. No outsider remained alone with the Alpha King after moonrise. Yet here she stood, unharmed, speaking to him as naturally as if they had known one another for years. Damien finally spoke, without looking away from Emily. "Tell the council they will wait." The servant stared in stunned silence before bowing again and hurrying from the room. Even the guards looked astonished. The Alpha King had postponed meetings before, but never for anyone. Emily blinked in surprise. "You should not delay important work because of me," Damien answered quietly, almost thoughtfully. "For reasons I do not yet understand. You may already be the most important matter before this kingdom tonight." Emily Carter lowered her eyes for a moment, unsure how to answer a statement that carried so much weight from a man she had known for less than an hour. She had come expecting to treat an illness, not to become the center of a mystery hidden inside the walls of the largest palace in the Northern Territories. Before she could speak, the oldest royal guard cleared his throat politely. "Your Majesty," he said with careful respect, "Miss Carter has traveled all day. Perhaps she should be shown to the guest wing before continuing tomorrow." Damien remained silent for several long seconds before giving a slow nod. "That would be wise." Emily smiled with quiet gratitude. "Thank you. A few hours of rest will help me think more clearly." She reached for her satchel, but before she could lift it, Damien had already picked it up. The movement was so natural that even he seemed surprised by it. Kings did not carry luggage for visitors. Guards immediately stepped forward, prepared to take it from him, but Damien raised one hand without taking his eyes off Emily. They stopped instantly. "Allow me," he said calmly. Emily hesitated before laughing softly. "You really do not have to do that." "Perhaps not," Damien replied, "but I would like to." The answer was so simple that no one questioned it aloud, although puzzled expressions spread across every face in the chamber. Together they stepped into the long marble hallway illuminated by rows of lanterns that cast warm circles of light across ancient stone. The palace felt different outside the audience chamber. Servants quietly arranged fresh flowers. Musicians packed away instruments after the evening banquet, and distant conversations drifted through open balconies overlooking endless forests washed in moonlight. Emily noticed something else as they walked. Every servant respectfully bowed to Damien, but many glanced toward her with open curiosity. Word had already begun traveling through the palace. The mysterious healer had remained alone with the Alpha King after moonrise and had walked away smiling. "Does everyone always look this nervous around you?" Emily asked with gentle humor. Damien glanced sideways at her. "Usually. More nervous than this." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "That sounds lonely." He almost answered automatically that loneliness came with responsibility, but the words never left his mouth. Somehow they felt unnecessary beside her. Emily was not asking as a court official searching for weakness. She simply wondered whether he had anyone willing to speak honestly to him. They reached a balcony overlooking the royal gardens, where silver fountains reflected the moon like polished glass. Emily paused beside a bed of white lilies, breathing deeply. "These flowers remind me of home," she said. "My mother planted them outside our little cottage every spring." Damien watched her kneel beside the blossoms with genuine affection shining in her eyes. Most visitors admired the palace because it represented power. Emily admired a single flower because it reminded her of family. Something inside him grew unexpectedly quiet. The restless pressure that had haunted him all evening eased for the first time in years. Behind the calm silence, the wolf seemed content simply watching her smile. Emily reached toward one of the lilies, carefully straightening a bent stem before noticing several leaves beginning to wilt. "These need more water," she said gently. "If they are watered just before sunrise instead of after breakfast, they will bloom much longer." The elderly palace gardener, who had been trimming shrubs nearby, looked up in surprise. "That is exactly what my late wife used to tell me," he said with a warm smile. Emily returned the smile. She was right. The gardener chuckled softly before hurrying toward the fountain to refill his watering can. Damien observed the exchange without speaking. She had not realized who the old man was, or that he served the royal family. She had offered kindness because it came naturally. Nothing more, nothing less. The wolf stirred again, but this time there was no urgency, no demand. Only quiet certainty. "See her?" Damien answered silently. "I do see her. More than you realize." As they resumed walking, Another servant accidentally dropped a stack of folded linens across the hallway. Before anyone else could react, Emily knelt to help gather them. Several nearby attendants rushed forward in embarrassment, apologizing repeatedly, but she simply smiled and handed each folded cloth back with patient encouragement. Damien stood motionless, watching the scene unfold. She treated servants, gardeners, guards, and kings with exactly the same respect. There was no calculation behind her kindness. It existed because that was who she was. The realization unsettled him more deeply than any prophecy ever could. When they finally reached the guest wing, Emily accepted her satchel with a grateful nod. "Thank you for walking with me." Damien looked at the closed door behind her before meeting her eyes one last time. "Rest well, Miss Carter." She smiled. "You should try to do the same, Your Majesty." After she disappeared into the room, Damien remained standing in the quiet hallway long after the door had closed. The oldest guard approached carefully. "How do you feel, sire?" Damien answered without hesitation, his gaze never leaving the wooden door. "That is exactly what worries me. For the first time in many years, I feel calmer when she is near than when she is gone." Morning sunlight poured through the tall palace windows, replacing the silver glow of the moon with warm shades of gold that softened the ancient stone walls. Emily Carter had barely finished organizing the herbs in her satchel when a gentle knock sounded at her door. A cheerful maid entered carrying a breakfast tray filled with fresh bread, honey, berries, and steaming tea. "His Majesty requested that you have a peaceful morning before continuing your work," she said with a respectful smile. Emily blinked in surprise. That was thoughtful of him. The maid smiled knowingly, but said nothing more before quietly leaving the room. Emily stepped onto the balcony outside her chamber, breathing in the crisp mountain air. Below, the palace gardens were already alive with gardeners tending flowers and servants preparing for another busy day. She noticed the elderly gardener she had met the night before carefully watering the white lilies before sunrise, just as she had suggested. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled broadly and tipped his hat with grateful appreciation. Emily waved back, pleased that such a small piece of advice had been welcomed. Far across the courtyard, Damien Blackwood stood on an upper terrace overlooking the same gardens. He had spent the entire night without meaningful sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the calm expression on Emily's face, her quiet voice, and the effortless kindness she had shown to everyone she encountered. His advisors had often claimed that strength demanded distance, yet the closer she came, the quieter the storm inside him became. "You have not attended breakfast," a familiar voice observed behind him. Damien turned to find Lady Victoria Ashford approaching with graceful confidence. As the daughter of one of the oldest alpha families, Victoria had spent years at court and was admired for her intelligence, elegance, and flawless manners. Many nobles quietly assumed she would one day become queen. She offered Damien a warm smile. "The council has been waiting since dawn." Damien nodded politely. "They can wait a little longer." Victoria followed his gaze toward the gardens below until she noticed Emily speaking with the elderly gardener. "So that is the healer everyone is whispering about," she said casually. Damien answered with calm simplicity. "Her name is Emily Carter." Victoria studied him for a moment. It was unusual for Damien to volunteer someone's full name without being asked. "She seems ordinary." Damien watched Emily laugh softly as one of the palace children proudly showed her a tiny bird resting safely in his hands after falling from a nest. Emily gently examined the little creature before helping the child place it back into a nearby tree where its parents immediately returned. "She notices things other people ignore," Damien replied quietly. Victoria folded her hands with practiced composure. "Your Majesty, the kingdom requires alliances built upon wisdom and tradition. People will begin asking questions if too much attention is given to an unknown visitor." Damien finally looked toward Victoria. His expression remained courteous, yet his answer carried quiet certainty. "Let them ask." Victoria forced another pleasant smile. But disappointment briefly crossed her eyes before she looked away. From somewhere deep inside Damien, the wolf remained perfectly calm while speaking to her. There was no interest, no restlessness, only silence. Moments later, Emily entered the courtyard carrying a small basket of medicinal herbs she had gathered from the royal greenhouse with permission from the head gardener. A young palace librarian named Nathan Reed greeted her warmly, offering to show her several ancient medical journals stored inside the royal archives. Emily thanked him with genuine enthusiasm. "I would love that," she said. "There is always something new to learn." Nathan smiled as they walked together toward the library entrance, discussing old remedies and healing traditions. High above them, Damien watched the conversation unfold. Nathan was respectful, kind, and completely harmless. Yet something unexpected shifted inside him. His attention sharpened. His breathing slowed. The quiet calm that had followed him since sunrise suddenly disappeared. The wolf lifted its head. Too close. Damien frowned almost imperceptibly. They are discussing books. Nothing more. He knows nothing about her. Neither do you. Damien remained silent, but he found himself following their progress across the courtyard with surprising focus. Nathan laughed at something Emily said, and she answered with an easy smile that reached her bright eyes. The sight should have been completely ordinary. Instead, Damien felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear or anger. It was simply the uncomfortable realization that someone else had made her smile before he had. The wolf spoke again with quiet certainty. "You noticed?" Damien exhaled slowly. "Yes," he admitted to himself. "I noticed." Standing nearby, the oldest royal guard observed the king's expression and then glanced toward Emily and Nathan walking side by side beneath the flowering trees. After decades of serving the royal family, he recognized the change immediately. It was not rage. It was not possessiveness. It was something far more dangerous because it was deeply human. For the first time in his life, the Alpha King was beginning to care who occupied someone else's attention. Emily Carter spent the next hour inside the royal library, carefully turning the fragile pages of medical journals that were older than the town where she had grown up. Nathan Reed eagerly pointed out handwritten notes left by generations of palace healers, and Emily listened with genuine fascination, asking thoughtful questions that made the young librarian smile with quiet pride. Time seemed to pass unnoticed until the palace bell chimed softly at noon. "You have a remarkable collection," Emily said. "Some of these remedies have nearly disappeared everywhere else." Nathan nodded. His Majesty has always insisted that knowledge should never be lost. Emily closed the final book with admiration. Then he understands something very important. As they stepped into the bright courtyard together, warm sunlight filled the gardens with the scent of blooming roses and fresh pine carried by the mountain breeze. Several members of the royal council crossed the courtyard at the same moment, bowing respectfully toward Damien Blackwood as he emerged from a nearby corridor after finally concluding the morning meeting. His expression remained composed, but his attention found Emily almost immediately. She was thanking Nathan for his help, her smile effortless and sincere. Nathan responded with equal kindness, offering to gather more books if she wished to continue her research later that afternoon. Emily accepted with grateful enthusiasm. From across the courtyard, Damien felt the familiar stillness inside him begin to fracture. The wolf, peaceful only moments before, became alert. "Watch him." Damien answered silently. "He is helping her." "There is nothing wrong with that." The wolf remained unconvinced. "He wants her attention." Damien knew that was probably untrue. Nathan had shown nothing except ordinary courtesy, yet the quiet certainty inside him refused to fade. He took one slow breath, reminding himself that a king should never allow emotion to guide judgment. Emily finally noticed Damien standing beneath the stone archway and walked toward him with relaxed confidence. "Your Majesty," she said warmly, "your library is extraordinary. Nathan has been incredibly helpful." Damien looked briefly toward the librarian before returning his attention to Emily. "I am pleased you found what you needed." Nathan respectfully bowed and excused himself, leaving them alone beside the garden path. Emily noticed Damien seemed unusually quiet. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He searched for the simplest answer. "I am trying to understand something. Perhaps I can help." Damien gave a faint smile. "That is exactly what makes this difficult." Before Emily could respond, a sudden gust of wind swept across the courtyard, scattering several loose pages from a stack of documents carried by a young palace messenger. Without hesitation, Emily hurried forward, kneeling to gather the papers before they could blow into the fountain. Damien joined her instinctively, reaching for the last page at the exact same moment she did. Their hands touched once again. The world seemed to pause. Emily felt an unexpected warmth spread through her fingertips, gentle rather than alarming, like standing beside a fireplace on a winter evening. Damien stood completely still. Inside him, every careful wall he had spent years building trembled beneath one quiet truth. The wolf was no longer merely watching. It had stopped resisting. Emily looked into his eyes, concerned by the sudden change in his breathing. "Your Majesty?" she asked softly. Damien closed his eyes for only a moment, struggling to steady the emotions rising within him. The wolf no longer whispered. It spoke with calm certainty that echoed through every corner of his heart. "Stop pretending she is only a visitor. She already feels like home." Damien slowly opened his eyes again, but before he could answer either the voice inside him or the woman standing before him, the palace bells began ringing across the kingdom, announcing the unexpected arrival of honored guests at the front gates. The palace bells continued echoing across the mountains as every servant, guard, and noble turned toward the grand entrance. Emily Carter instinctively stepped aside, expecting the royal courtyard to become crowded, but Damien Blackwood remained beside her for one quiet moment longer before duty finally pulled him away. "I must receive our guests," he said, his voice calm once more, though she noticed the faint hesitation before he spoke. Emily smiled reassuringly. "Then you should not keep them waiting." Damien held her gaze for another heartbeat, as though silently reminding himself that a king belonged to his people before anyone else. At last he inclined his head and walked toward the front gates, his long black coat moving gently with each measured step. Emily watched him disappear beneath the stone archway before turning toward the gardens, deciding to give him the privacy his responsibilities demanded. Moments later, elegant carriages bearing the silver crest of the Eastern Pack rolled through the gates. Nobles gathered on both sides of the courtyard, whispering politely as distinguished visitors stepped onto the marble path. At their center stood Lady Victoria Ashford, welcoming the guests with practiced grace, while members of the royal council formed an orderly reception line. Damien greeted each visitor with quiet confidence, offering respectful words that reflected years of disciplined leadership. Outwardly, nothing appeared unusual, yet the oldest royal guard standing nearby noticed one detail no one else seemed to recognize. Every few moments, Damien's eyes drifted across the courtyard, unconsciously searching for someone. Emily, meanwhile, had wandered toward the palace greenhouse after the head gardener invited her to see several rare mountain herbs that bloomed only during early summer. She listened attentively as the elderly man explained how each plant had been preserved through generations of careful cultivation. Her curiosity was genuine, and before long several younger gardeners had gathered around, answering her questions while she eagerly shared simple healing techniques from her village. Laughter rose naturally among them, light and effortless. On the opposite side of the courtyard, Damien caught the sound. His attention shifted almost immediately toward the greenhouse entrance where Emily stood surrounded by smiling gardeners. She was explaining something with animated gestures, and even from a distance, he could see the warmth in every expression around her. The wolf stirred quietly. "They are happy because she is here," Damien answered with reluctant honesty. "So am I." Before another thought could form, Lady Victoria approached his side. "Your Majesty," she said pleasantly, "the ambassadors would like to discuss tomorrow's banquet. They are hoping you will personally host the evening reception." Damien nodded politely, forcing his attention back to the conversation before him. "Of course." Victoria studied his expression carefully. "You seem distracted today," he answered without hesitation. "There has been much to consider." She followed his gaze and immediately noticed Emily in the distance speaking with the gardeners. Understanding slowly settled across Victoria's face. She remained perfectly composed, but disappointment flickered behind her practiced smile. Across the courtyard, one of the youngest gardeners accidentally dropped a clay flower pot while rearranging supplies. It slipped from his hands and rolled across the stone path before coming to rest near Emily's feet. She bent down with a soft laugh, carefully lifting the unbroken pot and handing it back to the embarrassed boy. "Everyone drops something eventually," she said kindly. "The important part is helping each other pick it back up." The young gardener's anxious expression melted into grateful relief. Damien watched the exchange from afar, feeling the now familiar calm settle inside him again. It was never grand gestures that drew his attention. It was always the smallest moments, the quiet kindness no one expected, and that Emily never seemed to notice she was giving away so freely. The wolf spoke with quiet certainty. She makes every place feel safer. Damien no longer argued. For the first time since inheriting the throne, he accepted the truth instead of resisting it. He could command armies, guide a kingdom, and carry the burdens of countless lives, but none of those responsibilities had prepared him for the simple power of one ordinary woman whose compassion quietly reached every heart around her, including his own. Late that afternoon, the royal banquet hall filled with quiet conversation as ambassadors, advisors, and honored guests gathered beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Emily Carter had not intended to attend, but the head steward politely insisted that every guest of the crown was expected to be present. Feeling slightly out of place among embroidered gowns and formal uniforms, she chose a seat near the end of the long table where she hoped to remain unnoticed. Damien Blackwood entered moments later, and the entire hall rose respectfully. He acknowledged the gathering with a calm nod before taking his place at the head of the table. His expression remained composed, yet the moment he sat down his eyes instinctively searched the room until they found Emily. Only then did a quiet sense of ease settle over him. The oldest royal guard standing near the entrance noticed the subtle change and lowered his gaze with thoughtful understanding. Dinner progressed with polite conversation as visiting nobles discussed trade routes, harvest forecasts, and preparations for the coming autumn festival. Emily listened more than she spoke, answering only when someone asked about her village or her work as a healer. Her sincerity quickly won the admiration of several guests who appreciated how naturally she spoke without pretending to impress anyone. Across the table, Damien heard every gentle laugh that escaped her lips. Each one seemed to lift a weight he had carried for years. Then one of the ambassadors smiled warmly at Emily and said, "Miss Carter, our province could use someone with your talent. If you ever wish to leave the mountains, we would gladly welcome you." Emily smiled politely. "That is very kind of you. I have not thought that far ahead." The ambassador nodded with understanding, but Damien felt something inside him tighten unexpectedly. The wolf, silent for most of the evening, stirred once more. "She cannot leave." Damien lowered his eyes to the untouched glass before him. "She is free to choose her own path." The answer came immediately, steady and unwavering. "Then tell her why you hope she stays." Damien's fingers closed gently around the edge of the table as he struggled to silence the voice within. He had faced impossible decisions before, negotiated peace between rival pacts, and carried the expectations of an entire kingdom without hesitation. Yet speaking one honest sentence to Emily suddenly felt more difficult than any royal duty. As the evening continued, musicians began playing a soft melody that drifted through the hall like a warm breeze. Guests mingled comfortably while servants refreshed cups and cleared empty plates. Emily quietly excused herself and stepped onto a moonlit terrace overlooking the gardens, hoping for a few moments of fresh air. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of pine and blooming lilies, calming her thoughts after the busy day. She rested her hands lightly against the stone railing and looked toward the endless forest stretching beyond the palace walls. A few moments later, she heard measured footsteps behind her. She turned to find Damien standing several feet away, giving her respectful space. "I hope I am not disturbing you," he said softly. Emily smiled. "Not at all. It is peaceful out here." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the distant fountain and the gentle rustling of leaves. Finally, Emily looked toward him with quiet concern. "You have been carrying something on your mind since I arrived." Damien released a slow breath. "I have." She tilted her head slightly. "Would talking about it make it easier?" He almost laughed at the simplicity of the question because no one had asked him that in years. Everyone expected answers from the king. Almost no one wondered whether he needed someone willing to listen. He met her eyes, and for the first time he stopped hiding behind titles, responsibilities, or carefully chosen words. "Emily," he said quietly, "before you came here, every room in this palace felt larger than it should. Every victory felt incomplete. I believe that was simply the cost of wearing a crown." She listened without interrupting. Damien's voice became even softer. "Now I find myself searching for you without meaning to. I notice when you smile. I notice when you leave." Emily Carter looked at Damian Blackwood in thoughtful silence, searching his face for any trace of obligation or royal formality. She found neither. Standing beneath the quiet moonlight, he was no longer simply the Alpha King, whose name inspired respect across every territory. He was a man who had finally spoken with complete honesty after years of carrying every burden alone. Emily smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the silver glow dancing across the palace gardens. "You know," she said gently, "when I first received the royal letter, I imagined I was coming here to heal someone else." Damian listened without looking away. "Now I think we have both been healing something neither of us understood." A quiet laugh escaped him, genuine and unguarded. It was such an unfamiliar sound that even the oldest royal guard standing discreetly near the terrace entrance looked up with quiet amazement. In all his decades of service, he had rarely heard his king laugh so freely. Emily rested her hands lightly against the stone railing once more and looked toward the endless forest stretching beneath the stars. "Tomorrow I should probably return home," she admitted. "My village will be wondering where I am." Damian remained silent for a long moment before taking one careful step closer, never crossing the respectful distance between them. "There is something I wish to ask," he said. Emily turned back toward him. "Then ask." Damian drew one slow breath. For years he had believed destiny was something forced upon people, something that demanded obedience without offering a choice. Looking at Emily changed that belief completely. "I do not want you to stay because of a title," he said quietly. "I do not want you to stay because of a prophecy, tradition, or expectation. I only want to know one thing." Emily waited patiently. His silver eyes met hers with complete sincerity. "When your own heart is ready, would you choose to walk beside me?" The question settled gently between them, carrying no pressure, only hope. Emily felt warmth spread through her chest as she realized he had offered her the one gift no story had promised her before: a choice. She smiled with quiet confidence and reached out her hand. Damian accepted it carefully, as though holding something precious rather than fragile. "I cannot promise what tomorrow will bring," Emily said, "but I can promise that every important journey begins with one honest step." Damian smiled, and somewhere deep within him the wolf grew completely still, not because it had claimed victory, but because it finally understood that love earned through trust would always be stronger than anything demanded by instinct. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of lilies through the gardens, while the palace lights glowed warmly behind them. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King did not feel like the strongest person in the kingdom. He simply felt grateful, and somehow, that made him stronger than ever before. Their story had not ended beneath the moonlight. It had only found its true beginning, built not upon fear, power, or destiny alone, but upon kindness freely given and a choice freely returned. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next journey. Give this video a like to support more heartfelt stories, share it with someone who believes kindness can change a life, and leave a comment below telling us this. Do you believe destiny chooses love, or does love choose destiny?